Okay, my little buddy, we are getting ready to do some sandblasting. He's got a full respirator on, goggles, the necessary protective gear. We're getting ready to start sandblasting the paint off of a brick fireplace. The painters, when they painted the whole house, they accidentally painted over the brick fireplace. And it wasn't supposed to be painted, so we have been hired to remove the paint off of the brick. Started out with a little test to see how thick the paint was, how sensitive the brick was. Got a feel for it, dialed ourselves in, and now we're starting to strip off the paint. Sometimes brick, like an old brick porch, might have 10 layers of paint from the last 30 years, and it's very difficult to remove. We have to go a lot slower. But this paint is only one layer thick, and it's not very tough. It's coming off nice. The grains of sand coming out of our blast hose, they're traveling about 600 to 650 miles an hour. That grain of sand hits the paint, goes through the paint, knocks the paint off. That grain of sand continues further inward till it hits the brick, and that grain of sand, it shatters into 20 pieces and turns into dust. Also, as the brick is getting blasted, it's stripping off and it's also turning into dust. While we are taking the paint off of the brick, we are also removing a very slight amount of brick surface immediately under the paint. We're always looking for the right speed so that we go slow enough to thoroughly remove the paint, but fast enough to not overblast the brick. If we traveled too slow, we can eat that brick up and literally put holes in a brick. So there's a fine line, slow enough to get full paint removal, but fast enough to not eat the brick up. After years of experience, it turns out 98% paint removal is the best line to dwell on. We're going to leave 1 or 2% of that paint behind so that we do not overblast the brick. If we went slower and we attempted to remove 100% of that paint, we would overblast the brick, and it changes texture significantly. Another challenge we face is not all bricks are made equally. They're not always the same hardness. Each brick is an individual, and they don't necessarily all come from the same plant or even the same batch. It's possible to find a few bricks that are crazy soft and weak, and the other bricks that were resisting our blasting fine, all of a sudden we hit a weak brick and it starts turning into powder and crumbling very quick. So we're constantly paying attention to make sure the brick isn't getting overblasted. When we strip paint off of steel, we tend to use a more consistent blast pattern and maybe travel a little slower. Here on the brick, we're doing a little bit of a spiral pattern, so the first pass is too quick and it shows us how sensitive the brick is, and what's left we'll spin around and come back and hit it a second time or even a third time. Unfortunately, it's a lot of effort, but it's the only way to get the paint off and not overblast the brick by being very careful. Ordinarily, I don't like blasting inside of a residence. Frequently, I will turn those jobs down and just walk away from them. As you're seeing, the sand shattering and the brick being chewed up is creating a dust storm. In a typical residence, that kind of dust is totally unacceptable. And the dust will travel through every room in the house unless that room we're working in is totally sealed off, taped off, and plastic everywhere to keep the dust in only that room. Another reason I don't like blasting inside of interiors is because I don't like having to tape off and hang the plastic. It's an enormous nuisance. Here, I'm showing him what angle I want him to shoot so that he doesn't accidentally overspray and hit the wall behind it. On the other side of that brick corner, 2 feet behind it, is a sheetrock wall. Very sensitive to any type of overblast. It's virtually impossible to not get the sheetrock at least slightly. It's just so sensitive. It has zero tolerance and zero forgiveness. So I frequently won't take an interior job because I don't want to have to tape it off and hang up plastic and be responsible for the sheetrock walls nearby. So I only take the interior jobs where the customer or another contractor does the taping and protection. So that I just come in, I blast the surface we're paid to blast, and I'm not responsible for protecting anything else because it's inevitable. You're going to get 1 or 2% or a couple little percent damage to the sheetrock, or at least the paint on the sheetrock nearby. Even if we don't hit it with the blast hose, that wind isn't done traveling after it carries a grain of sand to the brick and chips off a piece of paint. After that piece of paint has been chipped off, that wind will turn around, pick that grain of sand back up again, and start carrying it away as new air is being pumped into that area. So the sand that's already been used up will begin traveling in the secondary airstream that's being purged out. I wish there was some way to stop a used grain of sand from traveling any further, but since we're pumping in new air, that new air will pick up the sand. Even if it's sitting still, it'll pick up that grain of sand to start carrying it somewhere else. And enough of those floating grains of sand, they have a tendency sometimes to ricochet with the airstream and start stripping the paint off the sheetrock or some other thing nearby. Now here's a fireplace insert. I'm discussing I don't want them to try to blast the inside of that insert like the homeowner had hoped for. It turned out the blast protective tape that had been around the perimeter just didn't stick to the plastic and it immediately began dangling. So now I knew that fireplace insert would not have adequate protection from the direct onslaught of sandblasting. So I told him, stay out of that zone. I suspect there's a glass insert behind it, probably with a chrome or brass perimeter. So we're not going to blast the inside. There's a 2-inch lip in there that you can't see from this direction, but I showed him. I said, leave that paint in that 2-inch strip. Do not try to get it out. It'll go around his hanging plastic and we'll start dulling the shiny brass or the glass or whatever's behind there. So I'm making it clear we can blast up to the front of the face, but don't go inside. Now what he just peeled off, that blast tape, it sticks to the walls pretty good for the most part, but it's not sticking to the protective plastic that was already over that fireplace insert, so there's no point in leaving it. It wasn't doing any help. Luckily this house is new, under construction. There's no carpet on the floor, there's no wooden floor down, it's just a concrete slab. So that went a long ways to allowing us to get the bottom of the fireplace and not overblast anything right next to the edge. You'll notice in the zone of new paint, his first pass has a tendency to be too light. He would rather come back and have to hit it a second time to get all the paint, or even come back a third time to get all the paint off. We don't want to travel too slow and start chewing up the brick. Turns out he's a little too short. He's using a stool so that he can get up higher and get the paint higher up. Sometimes when we blast metal objects, we'll be relatively close, 2-3 feet away, so that the blast stream is extremely powerful, as steel can always resist it after we take off the rust or the paint. But in the case of brick, we want to be 4 or 5, maybe even 6 feet away from it. We want to give the grain of sand a chance to slow down a little bit before it hits, so that we're blasting as gently as possible. If you're a homeowner and you're considering getting the interior of your home blasted for whatever reason, just beware. I frequently don't clean up the sand and the mess. I don't want to deal with the headache, and if I do, I charge an arm and a leg for it. It's very expensive. Usually the homeowners can save a lot of money if they do their own cleanup. In this case, the homeowner asked me what would I charge to hang up plastic and put up tape. And I told him it'd be $1,000, and I wasn't even sure if I was willing to do it. He decided to save $1,000 to do it himself. And it probably took him 8 hours to tape off the entire room and hang plastic up in the doorways so the dust couldn't go down the halls. He's probably got an 8-hour day into all that taping and hanging up plastic and all the preparation. But hey, the 8-hour day, he saved $1,000. That's not bad. Most people don't mind paying me $250 an hour for sandblasting because we can strip so much material off so quick. But nobody wants to pay me $250 an hour to hang up plastic and tape. And I don't blame them, and I don't want that part of the job. Hanging up plastic and tape, typically at best, is only 90 to 95% dependable. It's normal that 5 to 10% of that plastic and tape will not stick to the wall completely, and it comes off while we're blasting, and then some nearby surface is getting the secondary ricochet blast that wasn't our intention. You can up at the top of the ceiling, you see that perimeter of tape on the ceiling. It's 6 inches wide, and it's very, very special tape that'll resist sandblasting. It's so we can get the brick right at the edge of the ceiling, and the direct blasting hits that tape edge and gives the brick a full cleaning, but that tape protects the ceiling from the direct blast. However, it's not practical to try to bring that tape out 2 feet around the fireplace. Therefore, the ricochet blast or the secondary wind that's blowing out of there can carry some sand, and it's unfortunately, but it's common that some of that ceiling will get a little bit of blasting effect, but at least it's not a direct on effect. That tape is taking 98% of the brunt. What little bit gets past that tape and does hit the ceiling or the walls, that's only 2% of it. That tape did really good at taking the full-on blast and protecting the wall within an inch or 2 or 3 of the brick, where the blast zone is full blast and at its most powerful. The fireplace sticks out from the wall about 2 feet, so there's a 2-foot edge on the side that you can't see with the camera, but he's over there getting that 2-foot edge.
Trying to get a view of what the whole room looks like.
That's a big old fan. It's almost as tall as I am. Those fan blades are turning a lot faster than the video camera shows. Does this show you how tall this fan is? It's as big as me. Takes up both double doors. There's another set of double doors, and identical to these, takes them both. And our blast hose is coming from outside. There's the blast rig on the street. It's coming from the blast pot, up that hose, up here, and all the way in. Okay, at this point, my camera lens is covered in dust, and I don't want to take a rag and try to remove the abrasive dust because a rag will trap it, drag that dust, and scratch the lens. So a paintbrush is the best way to remove the dust. And here is my $1,600 drone setup. I can control that camera, radio control, from outside and film him. Poor little boy, he's getting all dusty. Well, that's what I bought him for, so I wouldn't be in the dust. We got the towel on top, trying to keep sand out of the motors, but it's a DJI Air 2S. If you bought only the drone, it's a lot less money. But by the time I bought the Fly More package, extra batteries, extra special charges, a special carrying case, boy oh boy, it all added up. And all I wanted was a freaking camera for videoing sandblasting. But I used to use my cell phone. That meant I had to be in the sandblast storm, and I didn't like that. So I bought the drone to send him into the sandblast storm and get the video footage while I'm somewhere else happy and protected. One of the features of this drone I purchased it for was its ability to zoom in, and I could control the drone from a radio and not even be in the same room with it. So this drone's new to me. I'm kind of playing around, still learning some of its features. I'm just a kid with a new toy. You know how it is. I'm showing him what I can capture on the video. He thinks it's cool. I think it's cool. Showing him how good the zoom is. The drone's on the other side of the room, and I'm able to zoom in real close on the brick. We're both very impressed with it. Time for a little lens cleaning. My buddy asks me what I'm doing, so I'm showing him the brush. I offered to brush the dust off his eyelids and his nose and his goggles. He thought it was funny. It's a joke. We gotta enjoy ourselves while we work. But once he started blasting again, that room started filling up with dust. I'm gone. I left the drone in there and I left. For a lot of our blasting jobs, We have a larger industrial hood suit that goes over the head and shoulders and torso, much more protective than this, but it limits your visibility much more also. And in the case of Brick, he needed to be able to see very good, so he didn't do any overblasting. So instead, he used just a respirator and goggles, as it gives him more visibility than what our standard blast hood will do. This looks like the fun part. My little buddy's got to climb up on that scaffolding pretty soon. He's never had to blast off a scaffolding before. It's hairy footing while you're up there because the scaffolding will wiggle. And on top of that, when you pull the trigger and that blast hose fires up, it gives you 50 pounds of thrust. That blast hose wants to push you backwards and take you off your feet. You can tell by his ballet dance on the scaffold, he's having fun up there already. Or maybe I'm the only one having fun as I watch his nervousness. But the scaffold's in the wrong position, so it's got to get moved. He decided he didn't want to be standing up while I dragged the scaffold around. I don't blame him. I don't think I'd stand up while somebody else dragged it either. That protective blast tape wasn't on the ceiling at the edge of the brick, there would be holes all the way through that sheetrock. Over the years, we've tried many different kinds of tape for a protective edge around our blast perimeter, and we've discovered they all fail. I finally found a very special sandblast resistant tape made by 3M that can get sandblasted straight on and it won't disintegrate. So it offers very good protection in that 6-inch perimeter around our blast zone. The standard roll of duct tape is 60 yards long, which is 180 feet. The standard roll of duct tape is $6. The sandblast tape we're using is $40. It only gives us 30 feet of it. But it is self-adhesive and it will take the full onslaught of blasting. If it wasn't for that giant fan and the back door sucking the dust out of the house and the front door open allowing fresh air in, that room would just get cloudier and cloudier until you literally could not see it all. I know, we've been there, we've done it. It forced us to step up and buy some very expensive fans and ventilation systems just to purge that room with continuous fresh air to keep the dust down so we have at least some visibility. Now, if this was outside and I was stripping the paint off of a sidewalk or a driveway or stripping the paint off of a brick house, we can add water to our sandblast stream and we can do what's called dustless blasting. And it's tremendously effective at capturing the dust and reducing it by 99%. However, it turns the sand into wet mud, sticky, wet mud. So I can't use dustless blasting inside the house because there would be water and mud all over those walls where it splatters and it sticks. At least right now the sand on the floor is dry. It can be vacuumed up and swept up. But imagine trying to vacuum wet mud off the floor or sweep it with a broom and a dustpan when it's nothing but wet sand and mud. It's horrendous. So because this was an interior, we couldn't shoot it dustless. Instead, we had to shoot it dry and deal with the dust. The dust isn't bad as long as you've got the right protective gear. A respirator or blast hood are the two most important things. And I guess I'd have to say eye protection is equally important. The wimpier guys think they need protective gloves because the sand bouncing back will sting you a little bit. But after you turn into a real man, you don't need gloves. After the wind hits the fireplace, it's traveling in all directions. Some of that wind is traveling up towards the ceiling and coming in contact with the ceiling outside of the tape zone. And some of that wind is carrying extra sand that bounced off the fireplace, and the wind catches it and takes it on up and scrubs the ceiling a little bit. It can be fixed up with touch-up paint. I wish there was a way to avoid it, but you cannot be constantly pumping in new fresh wind and air to effectively blast and then not have that wind go somewhere else on the outbound exit. It's just not possible. I had a real hard time dragging him in that scaffold because the floor has got so much sand and dust. My feet were slipping. I almost couldn't drag him at all. Looks like he's enjoying the ride, doesn't it? I think he's having way too much fun. He should be paying me for this privilege. See behind his head, you've got that corner with three edges. Trying to blast in there is even more difficult because you get a vortex of swirling air and you don't know which way that excess air is rebounding and going and carrying sand. It's just not possible to predict where all of that air and sand is bouncing, ricocheting to. The air compressor we're using is making 375 cubic feet of air per minute. That's a lot of air. We've got a 100 horsepower diesel running that air compressor. trying to predict where the excess air and the ricocheting sand is going to go next is like trying to predict the weather. If you get really good at it, you've got a fair idea of where it goes, but you'll never have an absolute idea and understanding where every ricochet is going to head. Now right now it's pretty dusty, and that's because we've got that giant fan purging the room. If those doors were closed, well, one, you've got 375 cubic feet entering the room, and it must leave somewhere or the room would explode and burst. But if we were in a closed room without the fan, it builds up so dusty you literally can't see your hand in front of your face. I love watching him do this acrobatic act, climbing down the ladder, down the side of the scaffold, and retain his balance. We don't work off of scaffolds frequently, typically, virtually never, at least not sandblasting. We might do welding off of it or something else, but he's definitely not used to the scaffolding, and I don't blame him. Always making a game plan. Where to go next? What's the best angle to be at? What's the right distance to be at? What height do you need? Where does the hose have to go on the floor so it's not tangling with this, that, or the other thing? Now we're discussing the part you haven't seen, the archway. We're getting ready to blast that next. We're headed on over. You'll see it in a minute. What an ugly face. Only a mother could love that kind of face. There's the archway. That one's not fireplace, but that archway is brick. It also got painted, and it's time to remove the paint. Take the brick back to original. However, when the customer taped this up, I'm assuming the tape was adhering when he finished and left, but the following day when we arrived, a lot of that tape was already dangling and falling off the ceiling and the wall, and we had to go in and repair it. I'm getting ready to relocate the drone, but first I've got to relocate the scaffolding the drone was on. I wasn't willing to drag the scaffolding while the drone was on top. The drone would fall off and I didn't want to break it. So I moved the scaffolding and, scaffolding. And now I'm moving the drone for a better view, a different view. Now on the right side of the room, that's a giant entranceway to another room. The homeowner did really good taping that off and hanging plastic, and I was really impressed that plastic stayed in place and the tape holding it stayed. I was really impressed with that. Unfortunately, it's relatively common that you do your best to hang plastic and protect things, and that plastic doesn't stay in place. Once he's done blasting the brick, that dust will clear out of the room in about 2 minutes. It only takes 2 minutes to fully empty that room of all of the airborne dust. You can see our other small fan in the entrance helping to get circulation headed one direction, pulling fresh air in the front and blowing the dusty air out the back. Oh, for the record, there's many types of abrasive we can use for blasting. There's garnet, there's aluminum oxide, there's black beauty, there's coal slag, there's copper slag, and on and on and on, including crushed glass, recycled glass, glass beads, and sand. So no matter what abrasive we're shooting, we call it the same, sandblasting. We always call it sandblasting, even if we're shooting garnet or black beauty. We never say, oh, we're garnet blasting. And this is industry wide. Everybody calls it sandblasting, even if we're not using sand. That's just because sand was what invented the blasting process, which is technically called abrasive blasting, but its nickname seems to have superseded it, and everybody knows it as sandblasting, even if that's not the abrasive we're using. In this situation, I'm using crushed glass. The dust from crushed glass is much healthier than the dust from general purpose sand. The results are the same blasting wise. Crushed glass is a little bit more expensive. The dust from glass or garnet or black beauty, it's not unhealthy, it's not necessarily harmful, but it's just a nuisance. None of us likes breathing it, so we always have some sort of breathing protection, whether it's my full $1,200 respirated hood or just a cartridge respirator on your face. When we're sandblasting outside, dust is typically not a problem because it can't build up like it can in an enclosed room. We're discussing what angles to shoot, what ricochet we're trying to avoid, what airflows and air swirls and what vortexes we're hoping to identify, avoid, and use to our benefit and to not use to our detriment. And we can definitely improve things when we make a game plan. It's never perfect. This is sandblasting. It's like shooting a machine gun and expecting every single bullet to land in the same place. Doesn't happen. It can't happen. Some of it's always going to fan out and go wherever it feels like going sometimes. If you want 100% guaranteed protection, you've got to put plywood up on that wall and protect it with plywood, which is too time consuming, too expensive, and then you're poking nails through your sheetrock, and nobody goes to that extent. Ah, Mrs. Homeowner has arrived. She's inspecting it and seeing the progress for the very first time. They were so scared the paint wouldn't totally come off the brick. They talked to other experts and they were looking for a solution to get the paint off, and nobody could fully give them a guarantee that paint would leave. She is so pleased with this. I'm discussing with her the challenges we faced, the successes we had, the battle we're fighting, discussing the messy sand on the floor, generally giving her a one-on-one tutorial of what sandblasting is like for this particular situation. She had no idea what to expect, so this is all brand new to her. I saw some spots on the brick where it looks like they had tried to use a chemical paint remover, and it took, I don't know, 20-25% of the tape off, or the paint, excuse me, but it left so much paint behind. It clearly was not a success. They were scared that they were not going to get that paint off. I'm telling her how the room would fill up with dust while we're blasting, and it was difficult for her to imagine it and comprehend it. After my little buddy started blasting on the archway, she was out back of the house, out back by the porch, and she saw the dust flow begin to come out from that big fan. And when that dust flow became intense and serious, full on, she was so impressed we were making that much dust so fast. But hey, dust is just dust. It can be cleaned up, vacuumed up, swept up, shoveled up, blown out into the yard. Let your grass grow over it. That's what Florida is made of, sand. This is where we are right now in Florida. She can't believe how well that paint has come off. She's ecstatic. He's getting ready to strip more paint. Or should I say, he's getting ready to manufacture more dust. I don't have a respirator, so I'm hauling ass. I'm out of there. Poor drone. He gets left behind to get abused by all that dust. I'm hoping ricocheting sand doesn't destroy my camera lens. I don't know how often I can do this before the camera lens is frosted and cloudy. I'm taking a bit of a gamble. In the past, I've tried to stay in the room with my cell phone taking video, and I just couldn't stand the dust. So the drone is sacrificial. He protects me and my cell phone. In about 60 more seconds, the dust stream is headed for the big fan, and the drone happens to be directly between the source of the dust and the fan, so all of that dust and grit and abrasive is going past the drone and over it. And this footage was so cloudy, I actually gave up and quit filming it because you can't see a whole lot. The camera's in the dust stream. It's just too blinding. Now I'm headed outside with my cell phone to get some different viewpoints.
Man, this hallway clears the dust in 5 seconds. That room will take a couple minutes, though. You did good. Keep controlling where you hit. You did a lot better, buddy. Thank you. We learn. We learn as we go. The ricochet, yeah. You can't stop the air from carrying the sand further than you want it. Yeah, there's nothing we can do and the tape won't stick. Okay, the plastic, their tape job wasn't perfect. The plastic pulled free. This room is full of dust. alive.
Okay, I got tired of the drone being in the intense dust storm, so I just went and rescued it. I ran in real quick, grabbed it, and right now I'm hand carrying the drone as it's still filming. And now I'm trying to figure out, where do I want to go with it? What's the next footage I want? Do I want more footage? What's my goal? So I'm figuring this out by the seat of my pants as I go. Apparently I'm headed to the front yard, still carrying the drone. It could fly, but I'm carrying it. There's my blast trailer. In a minute I'll explain why the crane boom is up. So I'm spinning the drone by hand to get a view of the front of the house and the situation we're in, how the street was so far away and we had to drag 100 foot of blast hose in there. Now in a couple of seconds I'm going to set the drone on the ground, fire up the propellers, and fly it. Now I'd like an aerial view of the yard and my blast rig and the street and stuff like that. Hey, why not? You got a drone, brand new toy, you gotta fly it, right? I mean, it flies, so how can you not fly it? Okay, now I'm going to lift it higher up in the air, but I'm deciding what perspective, what point of view do I want it, so where do I want the drone? So I'm figuring this out. I'll have it figured out in about 10 more seconds. And I want to be far enough away from the trailer to get the whole thing in the picture, but not too close to the trees behind me that I hit him as I fly. Okay, the purpose of that crane boom is to lift that big giant fan on and off of the trailer. That giant fan weighs 250 pounds, and me and my little buddy, we're not going to manhandle that thing. We're a couple of old men. Brand new metal roof. It might only be 2 months old. How close can I fly the drone between the two columns to get a view inside the house? I don't want to get too close because it's easy to crash a drone into walls and columns. Very easy. I've actually done it about 4 times. So how close can I get, and how much zoom does the camera have to get inside while the drone is still outside, hopefully in safety? Now I'd like an aerial view around the yard and the roof and the rest of the house. Just because I got a drone, I got to. After all, this is still a part of the sandblasting project, right? There is legitimate need for this, right? See, there's dust storm. So this is legitimate. When he stops and takes a break or repositions, the dust coming out of the house will gradually slow down and thin out. A lot of people wouldn't recommend this while I'm flying, but right now I want to fly down into that dust storm and get a first-hand perspective. So I'm figuring out how to do this. How do you get the best perspective, the best view of the dust being extinguished or exiting the house? What's the best perspective? Sideways, head on, above looking down? I don't know. I'm trying a little bit of all of it. I'm experimenting. I always learn something from experimenting. Sometimes I learn what to do more of. And sometimes I learn, oh my goodness, I never want to do that one again. Now he's taking a break and the dust is reducing that's coming out. So I can get a little bit closer. Since I've got the propellers on the quadcopter flying, I don't want to be eating too much abrasive dust, as I'm positive that abrasive dust will eat up my motors and destroy them. The question is, how much is too much? How much can it tolerate and I can get away with? And how much is too much and I damage the motors and have to replace them? So it looks like he just pulled the trigger and the dust is starting to build up again. Yep, here it comes. How long can I stay in that stream and survive? And how much dust does the quadcopter ingest before I learned I'm regretting it? I've watched some videos changing the motors out in a quadcopter and the labor to take it apart and replace it. You're looking at about an hour per motor, and the motors are $50 each. So if I had to replace 4 of them, that's $200 cash out of my pocket and probably 4 hours of my time to replace 4 motors. So far I've never had to do it. Well, maybe that's slightly misleading. I haven't done it yet, but that's because the drone is still new to me and I just haven't abused him enough yet. I'll probably discover that limit one of these days. For a minute there, the dust is extreme, and then he must be repositioning because it starts to thin back out. Last time I went this way with the drone, I was carrying it. This time, I'm flying it to the front. I think I want to get a nice aerial view from high up of what's going on in the front yard and all of the house. There's only about 4 more minutes left this video and then it ends. A quick peek in the front door. Back away for some aerial height. Examine the tree branches. Make sure I don't fly into them because they're almost guaranteed to cause the helicopter to crash. Well, a helicopter's got one blade. Drone is a quadcopter. It's got 4 blades. So maybe I can't call it a helicopter. Fly it on up to 400 feet. Get a good bird's eye perspective. But I don't want to stay at 400 feet very long. You get too high off the ground, then low airplanes might crash into it. It's not that I'd hate for an airplane to destroy my drone. It's that I'd hate to see what the drone does to an airplane traveling at 250 miles an hour. So 400 feet for a few seconds, get a view, a little spin, just enough to get dizzy, and then I chicken out and want to get away from any nearby planes, which there shouldn't be any nearby because the drone will tell you when they're nearby. And if I don't go above 400 feet, I'm not flying into airplane-owned space. So I shouldn't have any problems, but I'm just being a chicken, so I'm coming back down. As I come down, I gotta make sure I don't come down into a tree. So I'm having to do this gently with different viewpoints so I know where I'm coming down because I can't see it yet with my own eyes. The sun is blinding me and I lost sight of it. I've got to get a little bit closer before I can see it again. Nice aerial view of my blast rig. I'm rather proud of that rig. I built it from scratch. I built the trailer, I mounted the compressor, I put the toolboxes on, I mounted everything on that thing. See, besides sandblasting, I'm predominantly a welding shop. Welding is what I did for a living until I added sandblasting to my lineup. So I built the pedestal for the crane, bought the crane, mounted it, hooked up the wires, reinforced the frame. That crane will pick up 3,200 pounds. That is so handy to have. He must have run out of sand. He's coming out to the pot, gonna blow the pot down, add another bag of sand because he's virtually done. He's only got a few minutes left to do, so he doesn't need a full pot. So the full pot will hold technically 6 bags. Right now he's going to add one more bag to it just to finish up the job. You can see the red pot right there at the end of the trailer. Empty, that pot weighs 550 pounds. And if it's full of sand, it will hold an additional 300 pounds of sand, so that pot can come in at 850 pounds. We'll use that crane and lift it off the trailer and set it on the ground. And sometimes we roll that pot inside buildings or farther away from the compressor if we have to reach places very far away. The record distance so far, I have blasted 400 feet away from the trailer. By building that trailer myself, I've got all that room underneath of that green air compressor for storage. A little close-up view, and I decide I'm too close. Let's not be that close. Did I just touch that exhaust flying over? It sure did look like it, didn't it? Well, I hope you learned something. I hope it was interesting. Forgive me for being a newcomer at videos and drones. It's about time to go. He's going to add another bag of sand, and I won't video this. Then we pack up and go home. See ya, folks. Have a good night.